It is one of the most exciting days for NBA fans. The annual NBA draft going on in Brooklyn, about to get started. We are here at McGonigal's Pub in Barrington. Want to thank them for inviting us out. Stacey King not able to join us tonight. Stacey's having some health issues right now. We wish Stacey the best. Hopefully he's going to be back with us next week on a broadcast. But we have his broadcast partner here, Adam Amin, kind enough to make the trip out to Barrington to join us. So Adam's going to fill us in on a lot of Bulls information, and as the picks go by, we'll give you some analysis on what we think of the fit of some of the guys that are going to some of the tail-ender teams in the NBA. First of all, though, let's talk, Adam, about some of the trades that were made the last couple of days, starting out with Bradley Beal. Washington is obviously going with a whole different philosophy now. They're going to tear it down, try to rebuild. They've got a new general manager, Michael Winger, and they decided that they can't go anywhere. They don't want to be stuck in the middle anymore, so Bradley Beal going to Phoenix to team up with Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. What do you think of that?
I was not surprised that Bradley Beal was able to get out. He has one of the few players in the NBA that had a no-trade clause, so essentially he gets to decide if and when he wants to go. It was a contract that I thought Washington was kind of hampered by for a long while, and they found a buyer. That was the other thing for Phoenix. Like, Matt Ishbia is a new owner for the Phoenix Suns, took over this past year for Robert Sarver after a lot of controversy and up and down nature of what that front office was looking like, and their harassment issues and things like that. So they get a new ownership group. They get Matt Ishbia in as a billionaire. He's going to spend money. He wants to spend money. Played basketball in Michigan State, so he's got a philosophy of winning, and he comes from that background. So he's very intent on trying to create a team that can win a championship. And look at the disappointment for Phoenix over the last 2 seasons alone. Even going back 3 years, you could probably go back to the bubble, and they were hoping to make the playoffs when they had this really impressive run and just fell short. So a lot of disappointment for that group for a while. So it's interesting to see what the change in philosophy has been for Phoenix. Their bench depth has been killed so far, so I'll be fascinated to see what they do with any type of picks that they get, any type of free agency opportunities that they're going to have, because they're going to have to spend on a lower scale. But I think Washington now looks like a rebuilding group. They have a whole new lineup for the time being, and again, I'm sure things will change in the next couple months. But it's a philosophy that makes things interesting because they were competitive. It suddenly doesn't mean, we're kind of writing Washington off. I don't think that means they're not going to be competitive this upcoming season. They're going to be a team that might fight for a play-in spot, much like the Bulls were this past season.
Yeah, to match salary, they took on the final year contract of Chris Paul, the future Hall of Famer. But then if you missed it earlier today, Chris Paul was sent to the Golden State Warriors in exchange for Jordan Poole, who still has 4 years left on that big contract that he signed before last season. Before we talk more basketball, I'm going to say hello to Timmy Whispers, who lives right down the street. And you told us that you live close enough that you can stumble home if you happen to maybe drink a little too much tonight.
That could happen tonight.
Keep that. That's a very subliminal message for everybody that's in the room. That if they want to hang out with Timmy and have a few,
you crash at his house.
You can just stay over with him and the family. So
I do have some cots. I got some blow-up beds. Everyone's welcome.
Everyone's welcome afterwards. So that's a very subliminal yet maybe not so subtle message from Timmy to the audience.
So Whispers, you got a tab that's always open here?
That's right.
So
I gladly
just mention Whispers' name, yeah.
I will gladly pay you on Tuesday for a cheeseburger today.
Just tell them you're with Whispers tab. I'm sure it's going to go over very well with everybody that's working.
That is the key word, but now everyone knows.
Of course,
blew the cover. Shinowski always blows the cover on this stuff.
No kid.
As we mentioned, Stacey unfortunately not able to join us. He sends his regrets. We're hopefully going to have him join us via Zoom in a little bit to say hello and answer some questions from the audience. But I remember Stacey back in the 1989 draft was one of the guys that was considered possibly to go number 1. He wound up going number 6 to the Bulls. And he tells the great story about his workout beforehand with the Bulls, where he thought he was going up against Dave Corzine, who had just recently retired in a one-on-one battle. And he said things got kind of physical underneath the basket. He started throwing elbows, and he said, "Come on, Corzine, get off me." And then he came to find out that it was actually Phil Jackson that he was scrimmaging with.
Yeah.
And the funny story about that was, if you recall your Bulls history, in 1989, Doug Collins then was fired a couple of weeks later, and who became the coach? Phil Jackson. So Stacey was always complaining, why didn't he get more playing time? It may go back to that pre-draft workout.
So I don't know if Phil Jackson's the type of person to hold grudges, but if he is, I think that would be a main indication of how he holds those grudges. Stacey, I always laughed. He has the famous line that he likes to dish out once in a while, where the only people that could stop me as a rookie were
exactly right.
were the people on the bench, and Phil Jackson was the main one. So
Yeah, Stacey was unbelievable playing at the University of Oklahoma. He led the nation in scoring. He was just unstoppable. And, I thought he might go number one in that draft. It turned out that Purvis Ellison was the number one pick in that draft. But, when you think about what Stacey accomplished at Oklahoma and then coming to the Bulls and getting 3 rings, he had a remarkable college career and then was fortunate to land in a situation where he could win right away.
What was the draft that shocked you the most? Because you've covered a lot of them over the course of your long career in Chicago specifically. What's the drafts like? Doesn't have to be necessarily a trade or a sign or anything like that, but what is the thing that sticks out the most from the drafts that you've covered that was probably as shocking as any?
Well, the thing that was shocking to me was when the Bulls had a 1.8% chance of getting the first pick.
It was Rose?
In 08. They got Derrick Rose.
So the Rose was the most shocking thing to you by far.
Well, not in terms of, a surprise pick or anything like that, but just the small odds the Bulls had to get that pick and to get the hometown kid was just remarkable.
The stars lined up very specifically.
I mean, the story went that John Paxson wasn't even watching the draft because the Bulls had dropped in the lottery the last couple of years. And so he said, why should I watch that? I'm tired of being disappointed. And his son came running up the stairs and like, you're in the final 3. They're going to commercial. And, of course, as it turned out, the irony of that, the other 2 people in that shot were Dwayne Wade and Fred Hoiberg, who were representing the Heat and the Timberwolves, which was kind of strange.
Coincidentally enough, obviously, would be very connected to the Bulls going forward.
So they ended up getting Derrick Rose, and, of course, that led to some of the most exciting seasons in Bulls history until, unfortunately, Derrick got hurt.
Yep.
And how about Cap's story about disrupting a
Yeah,
draft?
if you didn't catch last week's episode, the famous story from the 1994 draft when the Bulls were rumored to be trading Scottie Pippen for Shawn Kemp, and David Kaplan was working in local radio and got wind of it and started saying there was a report that the Bulls are going to make this trade. And the Seattle fan base was so up in arms about it that they threatened all to cancel their season tickets and basically go to the Sonics offices and riot. So the owners called the general manager and said, we can't make this deal.
So Cap, essentially,
he's saying he
blew the trade.
Yeah.
He blew up the trade that would have sent Scottie Pippen to Seattle for Shawn Kemp.
And he said George Karl to this day is still upset about it.
He ran into him and told him the story, and George Karl said, some asshole in Chicago told the press, and he goes, that asshole is me.
Yeah, sure enough. Cap, I know, of course, Cap would be involved. Cap is like the Zelig of Chicago sports broadcasters. He's always been seemingly connected with somebody or some kind of story.
There's a lot of degrees of separation when it comes to David Kaplan. He is right now the king of Chicago media. He's got his hand in just about everything. If you're following along live on YouTube, we welcome you. Say hello. We've got some people on the chat. If you have some questions about the draft, about the Bulls, feel free to put those in, and we'll try to get to some of those questions. Also, we'll try to get some questions from the audience here at McGonigal's before we're done. Commissioner Adam Stern, I'm combining the two. Adam Silver,
yeah.
God rest your soul, David Stern. Adam Silver welcoming the fans over at the Brooklyn location of the draft, and they're getting ready to announce Victor Wembanyama as the first pick. I'm sure you've seen some tape on this kid. How good do you think that he potentially can be? Because no one really knows. I mean, I remember Ralph Sampson coming into the league at 7'3", and people thought this was going to be a whole new evolution in basketball, but Ralph Sampson didn't have the combination of ball handling and outside shooting that this young man has.
I think there's some potential here to be like a Dirk Nowitzki type of player. So when Dirk came into the league, Nowitzki, I think LeBron has said this. I think other players around the league have said this. A lot of people think the most unguardable shot of all time was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's skyhook, right? And that's obviously the famous image of him coming across the lane. He was so lengthy, he was so tall, you could not block the shot. And the second most unblockable shot in the NBA's history is Dirk Nowitzki's one-legged fadeaway because of his size, his reach. Wembanyama's 7'2", 7'3", 7'4", depending on which person is talking about him that day. And you cannot block what he puts up for the most part. It is near impossible because he's already, without jumping, he's already able to tower over guys and able to get reach over guys. And then you put him up against some of the elite shot blockers in the NBA. They don't have the ability to jump with him the way that they might have with somebody a little bit bigger, who is maybe not as spry, somebody who's a little bit more of a traditional 5, because that's what you think of with guys over 7 feet. You just assume that, they're going to play a 5, even if they're a stretch 5. Wembanyama is just a different type of player. It's a type of player that we haven't really seen over the course of the last, maybe ever, probably going back to guys like Ralph Sampson, who had the same type of body but didn't have the same type of game that this guy has. So the uniqueness of what Wembanyama is might be enough just to separate him in a lot of different ways. I understand a lot of the concerns with his size. He's not the thickest guy. He's very skinny in the legs. And he's talked about that. He said it doesn't really matter. I think other guys should try to play basketball with a little bit of a different body type. It doesn't always have to be a dominant physical capacity for a player to be really, really good. So I think all those things, the physical elements of what he brings to the table, the ball handling elements that he brings that are more guard-like than they are big-like, it's a unique player. Is he going to be the greatest player of all time? I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily fair to put on him. I think it's more important to kind of look at him as a unique talent that may bring something that we've never seen before to the NBA, much like Nowitzki did, much like LeBron did, much like a player like Steph Curry or maybe even Klay Thompson, but more importantly Curry, what those guys have brought to the table. I think that's what's more important with Wembanyama.
And you think about the San Antonio Spurs. Of course, they had David Robinson, the Hall of Fame center, and then they had the one season where Robinson was injured and they bottomed out and they win the lottery and pick up Tim Duncan. Of course, that led to multiple championships, and now they have the good fortune of winning the lottery and getting Victor Wembanyama. And, of course, the former Spur, Tony Parker, a native of France, and I think that kind of gave Victor the idea that he might like to come to San Antonio. And this is probably going to rejuvenate Pop's coaching career because he's at the age where you think, well, he's probably thinking about retiring. He may go on for several more years with the possibility that this guy could develop into one of the best players in the league.
I caught up with Greg this past season, so we had a friendly relationship when I was at ESPN, and he's always been very kind and gracious, especially away from the court. Whatever demeanor you might think of Greg Popovich on TV, it's not really that.
Yeah,
He's
right.
It's more purposeful. It was the first time, he said, and a lot of people around the organization said, it was the first time in a long time that Popovich was really enjoying coaching again. He was enjoying teaching again because that's what he is at heart, right? He wanted to develop and teach and grow a lot of these young players that we grew to appreciate as some of the best players that we've seen, at least in the last 30 or 40 years, like a Tim Duncan, like a David Robinson, like a Parker, like a Manu Ginobili. He had Kawhi Leonard when Leonard was starting to come up as a young player before he got traded. So I think it's the first time in a long time where he really felt rejuvenated about teaching the game. They were bad. The Spurs were really bad this year. They won 20, 22 games, something like that. But that was the point. They were trying to tank, and they were trying to get their young players more opportunities. They traded away DeJounte Murray for that reason, to try to get some depth back. They still have an opportunity to get more talent in over the course of the next 2 years. There's no guarantee that they're suddenly going to be a 45-win team,
right,
even with Wembanyama. So I think you're right. I think this rejuvenates Popovich. I think he could have another 5 to 10 good years left in him before, and again, who knows what he wants to do going forward, but I feel like you're right. I think that has rejuvenated the organization, it's rejuvenated their fan base, and it's definitely rejuvenated Popovich.
Speaking of rejuvenation, Chris Paul thought he might be a Washington Wizard, and now he's going to the Golden State Warriors to team up with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, and all indications are that Draymond Green would like to stay with the Warriors in free agency. How does that fit with Chris Paul at 38 years old, teaming up with Steph Curry? They both like the ball in their hands. Of course, you can run Steph off screens, and you can make that work. But do you think Chris Paul comes off the bench with the Warriors?
And I don't think so. I think it's a staggered lineup. I think we've seen this enough in the modern NBA, where you have two guys that need to have the ball. It's when they're willing to defer. I think the biggest thing with point guards and ball handlers, like main ball handlers in the NBA, most important thing is, do the players around them trust them in a late game scenario to do the right thing ball-wise? Because in Boston, you have Jason Tatum, who is a ball-dominant guard, more of a shooting guard, but he's a ball-dominant wing player, and he needs the ball in his hands to be really, really effective. He doesn't have to have it necessarily from a point guard duty, but he needs to be able to take the shot. There is a trust factor when it comes to Marcus Smart and Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum in those late-game situations. You saw it in the playoffs. Marcus Smart ended up taking late-game shots that didn't go down because teams were so hell-bent on taking Jason Tatum away, and they did a pretty good job of that. The Heat did a good job of that in their series. They were able to force guys to take shots that didn't want to take them, but the trust factor is still there for not only Marcus Smart to know that Jason Tatum is going to need the ball late, but if he's not there, there's a trust factor to let these guys take shots. That, to me, does allow Steph Curry a little bit of pressure off of him. You still have Klay Thompson, and you have Chris Paul. All can take a big shot, all can make a big shot, Wiggins is still there. He's capable. I think they have options. The biggest thing in terms of fit to create it well is do they know where to go with a 2-minute game in a 3-point contest? Do you know where the ball needs to go, what action needs to be run, and is it going to be in the right hands come 4 seconds, 5 seconds on the shot clock in one of the final 4 or 5 possessions of a game? And I think the Warriors can figure that out. I think they're a veteran enough team. And I think at this point, Chris Paul is just hell-bent on getting a title. I don't think he cares. I don't think there's ego there anymore. I think in years past, he's with the Clippers, with the Rockets, it's been, I want this to be my team. I don't think that's the case anymore, and I think this is a run to try to get that elusive championship in an otherwise Hall of Fame career.
And as we're speaking, the first pick was just announced. Shocker. Victor Wembanyama going to the San Antonio Spurs, and it was interesting seeing him walk up to the stage and give the bro hug to Commissioner Adam Silver, and there is a bit of a height disparity.
But you know what? The thing is, though, Wembanyama makes everybody look small.
Sure.
Adam Silver is pretty tall,
Yes,
all
he
things
is.
considered, based on where he's standing compared to Victor Wembanyama. He made a lot of guys look small. He made Shaq look a little bit small.
That's
you
true.
know, like there's a lot of it. It's very. He makes. Do you see the picture of him with the baseball in his hand?
Yeah.
He threw out the first pitch at Yankee Stadium the other day, and then he took a photo and posted it of him holding a MLB baseball, and you can barely see the baseball because his hands just cover so much of it.
Of course, now the drama begins with the second pick. Will the Charlotte Hornets take Scoot Henderson, or will they go with Brandon Miller? And that's kind of gone back and forth the last couple of days. Adrian Wojnarowski had said that it was going to be Brandon Miller, and then the odds in Vegas shifted that it's going to be Scoot Henderson. Scoot's not really a great fit in either Portland or Charlotte because they have such, established guys at the point. But he's such an amazing talent that you hate to pass. I mean, when you pick that high in the draft, are you of the mind that you're best to go with the best available and don't worry so much about what position they play?
I think it's dependent on the year, too. It's very much what your roster is made up of, because if you have the luxury of taking the best available player, you want the best available player. But if you have holes that you have to plug, then you really have to look at whether this person fills a lot of needs. Now, that being said, that can also come back to haunt you, because we've seen it in Chicago. We've seen it in other cities. It happens, all the time in drafts in various sports. But you go, oh, you passed up on this guy to go grab this guy. Part of it is the context of that particular draft and that particular personnel group when that draft takes place. And it's hard to. I always feel bad sometimes. I mean, not too bad, but I feel bad kind of looking back often and saying, well, this clearly didn't work, or this trade didn't work out. It's like, yeah, but was it made with the right idea in mind? Was it made with the hope of fixing something that desperately needed to be fixed? Like, I look at the Vucevic trade now, and it's very easy to say, well, the Magic won it. The Franz Wagner pick is easy to look at and be like, man, you could have had a player like a Franz Wagner.
Right.
So I understand why the assumption is, well, the trade, the Orlando won the trade. But would you have still made that trade at the time? Like, it feels like yes, based on the circumstances, you probably still would have made that trade when given the opportunity to make that. So I always feel bad evaluating trades on the surface level or picks on a surface level, because there's a lot more that goes into these types of moves and these situations. I've been talking about it a lot with the Bears this offseason with Ryan Poles. Like, he's doing the things that make sense logically for a football team. A lot of the things that we see more often than not are logical moves that you're trying to make for the roster that you currently have, the personnel that you currently have.
Victor being interviewed now on the national broadcast on ESPN. He's got some family members with him, wiping away a few tears. And, he's come across as an incredibly confident young man, but you got to remember, what is he, 19 years old, coming to the States, and it's got to be a huge adjustment for him. And Pop isn't going to go easy on him either. I mean,
No.
he's going to make sure that he earns his minutes and plays the right way.
I think that's what's going to be fascinating, is the relationship between Wembanyama and Popovich. I also want to know what Timmy was like as a 19-year-old.
Oh, that's trouble.
I'm sitting in jail.
Okay, there you go. That's what I wanted to know. I wanted to know that, and I'm going to hear the story about it later. After Timmy has a few, then I'm going to get to know and understand what
We have
Timmy's
to
all
change
about.
names and the story to protect some of the other people.
That's fine.
so-
We'll blur it out. Whatever we have to do.
So you grew up in this area, right, Tim?
Yes, I did.
And you were a high school star,
Big star, huge. No.
mega
not
sports
really.
star.
Not really.
Yeah. What was your best sport?
They called me Splinters.
I'm sure some folks out there has got some Tim Kelley stories.
Some gymnastics, some football, some soccer. Played a bunch of things, but
That's why Timmy's in such great shape now.
Yeah.
Because he
Right.
was a gymnast back in the day.
I thought
That's
it was
what
the beer, but
I don't know. Yeah, he was telling me he was on like a cleanse.
that's right.
You're on
I
a
just
cleanse
did that.
recently.
That's a rough thing to do. You should try it someday.
Oh gosh, it sounds horrible. It sounds legitimately horrible.
Tim even tried to do some MMA to try to get closer to his son, right? So that was the motivation with that?
That was part of it to get him involved, and that worked out well for him and bad for me.
Yeah, it didn't seem like physically that worked out great for
Yeah.
you at all. Gosh.
Yeah.
So we're still waiting for the second pick to come.
What do you? Where's your head at with the second pick? Because there's been the Miller Henderson thing has been going on for a while now. You said it. The odds have shifted multiple times. I don't know where.
It's
what
hard
I
to
would want.
project after Scoot Henderson's played a couple of years with the G League Ignite, and Brandon Miller 1 year at Alabama. I saw maybe 3 or 4 Alabama games. I came away feeling like he's a nice prospect, but not oh my God.
Yep.
Sometimes you see a college player and you go, this guy's gonna, like when I saw John Morant, my jaw just dropped. I'm like,
course.
this guy is gonna be a can't miss kind of type of talent.
I think it's
but
Scoot.
I didn't really see that as much with Brandon Miller, and of course he had the off the court issues, which I'm sure trouble some teams, especially with what we've seen with John Morant lately.
So it is.
It's going to be Brandon
Brandon
Miller
Miller.
going
Wow.
second.
Brandon Miller goes second to the Charlotte
And the
Hornets.
irony of this is that we've been reading for the last couple of days that Michael Jordan, after selling the team, is going to be the one that makes the decision. Which
is this
is
MJ
very
making
odd.
the pick for Brand? Is this MJ saying I want Brandon Miller?
And why would he have, that right to do that and kind of stick this guy, whoever they take it to, is going to be a face of the franchise, and yet you're walking away from the organization. And of course, Mitch Kupchak is the general manager, another North Carolina guy who
Yep.
Michael brought in, and you don't know what his future is going to be with the organization.
I mean, Bob Myers is out there now in terms of possible executives, so I'm sure there are going to be a lot of franchises that look at his track record at Golden State and all the winning that he did, and I'm sure he's going to demand a salary and a lot of resources to wherever he ends up going, but I can understand that too. He's got the track record that you want from an executive. I guess I understand the Miller pick for Charlotte because of LaMelo, but so and they had the second pick. They had the pick before
They
Portland.
still have
did, so-
Terry Rozier. But they have been a strange team. They brought in Gordon Hayward. They drafted P.J. Washington. They had Cody Zeller for a while. It's just an odd roster. And then Miles Bridges, of course, had the off-the-court issues where he didn't play at all last year.
Yeah, I still feel like their roster is good though, and I think they've drafted well the last few years. That is one thing that kind of goes under the radar about Charlotte because Nick Richards has turned out to be a really good pick this year after kind of slogging his way through his first couple of seasons at the NBA level. I thought Mark Williams was a really good young player. Stacey and I were really high on Williams as like one of the better young centers. He's not Walker Kessler. He's not like an all-defensive team in the NBA right out of the gate, but he was a really good defensive player at Duke. I think he was ACC Defensive Player of the Year, if I'm not mistaken. He was a really good shot blocker. He was a really good rebounder. He started to score a little bit more. I've liked the Washington pick. Again, is it worthy of a top 12 pick? Maybe or maybe not, but it turned out to be a pretty solid pick. He's been a contributor to that team. They just haven't won a lot of games, so you don't think about them as winning players because they haven't won the games necessary for you to change your perception of them. But talent-wise, I actually think they've picked very, very well over the last, I would say, 4 years.
Yeah, it's been kind of strange. They brought in some guys that look good from their college careers or previous NBA stops, and nothing has really come together for them. And now Michael's walking away. Of course, he made a killing on that. Do you see that? How much he sold it for? $3 billion.
10 times as much as he put in, or something like
Not
that,
too
or 12
bad.
times.
Everywhere he walks, he's got the Midas touch.
And what did Scotty say about it?
Then John Greenberg, our friend from The Athletic, wrote a story that Michael should come home and buy the Bulls. Given his track record as an executive, as an owner, I love Michael, greatest of all time, but do you really want him calling the shots in ownership?
I don't know, maybe he comes here and his ownership style or the resources are different. I don't know how to predict that. I don't want him to be the owner of the Bulls because I already have a very specific idea of him. I don't think of him that much as an executive. Right? I think I understand that he is and has been for Charlotte for a long time now. I think of him because I'm from here, because it's the team I grew up with. To me, he's just the player. I don't even think about the Wizards years, at the end of his career, even though he had an ownership stake, basically. He's a player owner in a sense for the Wizards. I don't think about that. That's kind of been misremembered from my head. It's disengaged from my memory as a Bulls fan. So I just like him as the player and the kind of avatar that he is for my childhood, for the team itself, all that stuff. I prefer him as that. I don't want to have to connect him in any way. You see that happen with your favorite player as a kid on a baseball team comes back and becomes the manager and doesn't do particularly well. That kind of sullies your view on that person or that player, and I don't necessarily want that. That's just I'm not saying that's not a business answer. That's a very personal preference for me that has nothing to do with the business of basketball.
If you are just listening to the podcast, we are recording from McGonagall's Pub in Barrington. I want to thank all the folks who come out to keep us company as we watch the NBA draft and as we approach the third selection. This was one of the spots where the Bulls had kind of come into play as a possible rumor that maybe they would trade Zach LaVine or some kind of package to move up to get Scoot Henderson, because we all know, Adam, and calling the games night after night, that at point guard with Lonzo Ball no longer able to play, it appears, is definitely a position in need. But the Trailblazers are in a unique position. Damian Lillard wants veteran help around him so that they can make a jump and get into playoff contention next year. And the Trailblazers organization said, but Scoot Henderson could be a perennial all-star down the road.
I feel like the Russell Westbrook comparison is pretty fun to think about. If you're looking for a more, for a younger comparison, I've read the Colin Sexton comparison, and I've been a big fan of his since he was in Cleveland. Obviously, he's in Utah now and in a very solid season working with that group. That Utah team improved a lot to their credit, and a lot of the younger players that they have really developed well under a first-year head coach this year. So I think that a player like him would be valuable to Portland to have as a kind of lead guard, with Damian Lillard not having to have the ball in his hands as often. The Bulls, if somehow, again, the time is kind of running out at this moment for one of these big moves to be made. This would have been a great partner. I don't know if that's fair. I think it would have been a great trade partner if the Bulls were had the chance to get the number 3 pick. I just don't see it happening. Portland's coming up right now.
And the Bulls, of course, are owed a pick by the Portland Trailblazers from that three-way Lowry Markkanen trade from a couple years back.
Yep.
And we're waiting on the commissioner to announce the selection. There's no question it's Scoot Henderson. It's just a question of, is he going to stay in Portland? Will they try to make some deal later on? I just have this feeling Damian Lillard's going to wind up in Miami. It's gotten to the point where the NBA is starting to trouble me with players not only saying they want to be traded, but they dictate one or two teams that they want to go to and really handcuff the franchise for years to come. I predicted Lillard's going to end up in Miami for some kind of package, and it's unfortunate that these smaller markets aren't able to hang on to their stars because they're looking for either some elusive championship or to join some super team somewhere else.
Well, I wonder, though, how you balance that, because there's the idea of creating a franchise specifically just, we have to win now, win now, win now. Then there's the teams that are trying to build for a long period of time. And then there are teams that, like you're talking about with Portland, that don't really have a lot of championship. Their ceiling for a championship is pretty low. There's not a lot of opportunity for that particular group. It feels like, from the outside looking in, based on their front office turmoil the last couple of years, based on the personnel that they've had around Lillard, based on the injuries that they've had, like Yusuf Nurkic being out for almost 2 full years, basically. Feels like that's hamstrung that organization because he's a talented player who works well with Lillard, but there's no consistency there. They've made one deep playoff run. I covered that team in 2019 that made it to the conference finals and had a lead in every game against Golden State and ended up getting swept in that series. They took Golden State to overtime in Game 4 and still ended up losing. It just doesn't feel like they're built for that. So how do you balance that as an organization and say, well, we have Damian Lillard. He said that he would like to compete for a championship here. We have a loyal fan base, but they're getting a little bit restless. What do you do? And listen, the Bulls feel shades of that right now. Half the teams in the league have that feeling kind of over their organization right now because it is a what do you do at this moment type of league, and there's no formula. In the NBA right now, and especially in Adam Silver's NBA, the parity level is much higher than it used to be. We've had how many different champions in the last 7 years or so, right? Ever since the Golden State dynasty kind of not finished, but like was in its main
it's five
window.
different champions in the last 5 years.
It's 5 and 5, right?
Yeah.
So at this point, you're seeing some of the parity kind of come back, and you can win in smaller markets if you sign the right players. I think it has a lot more to do with the shrewdness of front offices and capitalizing and jumping on the one-time opportunity that you might have at the right trade deadline to say now's the time to make your move. Phoenix tried it. They fell a little bit short this year with Durant. You know, Milwaukee has done it by bringing players in at the right time, seemingly. Golden State did that. You know, the Lakers, they didn't win a title this year, but look what they did at the trade deadline. They felt like it was a good opportunity for them to capitalize, even though they had two major contract players on their roster in Davis and LeBron.
Do you think this changes the whole view on the G League for players coming out of high school saying, I'm jumping to that and not going to a blue blood?
Well, some of these programs now, they can get paid, you know, some decent money to play professionally before they go into the NBA draft. That's what we're going to be seeing, the two Thompson twins being taken, and they played a couple of years with the G League Ignite. And, you know, now I think there are other options like Overtime Elite where guys can make some money while they wait for the opportunity to be draft eligible. But, you know, guys will continue to go to college and try to go to those top programs and be featured there, maybe have a chance to win an NCAA championship ring. But, you know, it's still a one-and-done kind of issue. And now with the transfer portal, guys are hopscotching all over the place. I'm sure it's a very difficult time for college coaches. Tim, tell the folks here what we got going on in terms of the hot sauce and the potential to win a prize here.
Yeah, there's some nice little prizes here. Signed 3-pack of bottles and a signed ball from Stacey. And if you buy some sauce over there, you could win one of those. There's a sticker under one of those bottles that'll get you one of these prizes here. And, of course, you can always get some good hot sauce.
Yeah, so Stacey's hot sauce now available in your local Jewel Osco stores.
This was a big deal for him. He was very excited about this the other day. All right?
Yeah.
This was a big deal to get into Jewel. This is
Right.
where this is where I grew up going to for groceries.
That's Jules.
The Jewels.
The
yeah.
Jewels. I will say this. I swear to you, I'm not getting paid for this. All right, I got tossed into this late. We'll pull the curtain back a little bit. Okay. Stacey calls me yesterday and asked me if I can jump on this because again, he's under the weather. I hope he's feeling better because I adore the guy and I hate when he's not feeling good. I said, sure, I'll be happy to do it. I promise you, I'm not getting paid for anything I'm about to say. I love the hot sauce. The barbecue sauce was shockingly one of my favorite things. I got a thumbs up there, so that means I'm not lying about this. The barbecue sauce was as impressive as anything I've tasted in a long time.
You know,
I love the
we're
green
gonna
sauce.
pay
I like
in
the hot.
barbecue sauce.
I've already stolen 2 boxes, and they're in the car right now. What did you think I came here for? I'm not getting paid. Like I said, I'm not getting paid for it. I will take the barbecue sauce.
And even Christopher Walken is a fan.
That's right.
Tell the folks who may not live in the Chicagoland area how they can get a bottle of
Well,
Stacey
first of
King's
all,
special
thanks for
sauce.
having me out to McGonagall's. I've never been here before. This town is fantastic.
How
and
about the roadblocks they set up for you so you can make your way in here?
those were set up for me, Mark, to
I
keep
know.
the people out.
Get the riffraff, right?
Yes. And one of the deals right now, if you go online, you can get any bottle of the Super Hot, the 1871, that'll burn your eyeballs out of your sockets, or the barbecue by putting in the code 1871 or BBQ.
Always like to have the support of Christopher Walken. You never know what celebrity.
Since day one, he's been a supporter of the
He's been a
podcast.
fixture of the Gimme the Hot Sauce podcast.
Thanks, Mark.
Since day one,
I only
Christopher
get-
Walken,
I only
big
get
fan of
sauce,
Gimme
too.
the Hot Sauce.
Like Adam, I only get the sauce.
Even our Irish impersonator Al Foran was impressed by Tim.
That's
Yeah.
a big deal. I feel like that really made Timmy's month more than anything else. GimmeTheHotSauce.com. You can use the code KING21 to get 21% off your first order.
And for those of you looking for a new insurance man, we'll tell you about our good buddy Jeff Vukovic. When it comes to insurance for your auto, home, and business, make sure you contact the king of insurance. That's our friend, nationwide agent Jeff Vukovic. You can reach Jeff at jeffvuk.com. That's jeffvuk.com. We would sing the jingle, but if we did, Stacey would rise out of his bed and come over here and throat
Oh,
punches.
Adam's got it.
No, God, no.
Isn't that,
I've
that
already,
can be an awkward moment when you're doing the broadcast, and Stacey all of a sudden goes, okay, you take it.
Here's the thing. He jumps it on you. Like I said,
Yeah.
much like he jumped this on me yesterday. Like he'll just, all of a sudden, now he goes, all right, go ahead. You're taking it.
Right.
It happens once every 48 games.
Yeah.
and then I have to jump in and try to do the nationwide jingle, and it's a huge disappointment to everybody, rightfully so.
Yeah.
It's a huge disappointment. You want to hear Stacey do it, so I leave it to the man to try to handle it more than anything else. So.
And how about Jason and Steve Stone doing it every night? That's a tough hoop to jump through.
It's a tough hoop to jump. I filled in for Jason a couple times, obviously, the same way he fills in for me on the Bulls,
Right.
and I was with Steve, and he made I tried to do it with both of them, and it did not go particularly well. And I had that kind of burned into my memory for the rest of the night, where Steve is just laughing at me attempting to do the nationwide jingle. So again, never. I'm not saying never again. I'm gonna hold back until like good moments to actually do it.
Yeah, a while back.
Desperate, and by good I mean desperate moments to do it.
Yes,
We're completely. We have nobody else. Stacey's voice left in the second quarter. Now I have to do it.
Yeah, a little while back, he told the Sriracha crew to sing the jingle, and they were just terrified. And then they gave it their best effort, and Stacey said that was awful.
And then yeah, so
you can't win.
So
no matter what you do, you're gonna lose.
You guys knew yourselves. You guys understood. Like you're like, we don't want to do this. We don't want to make. You got put on the spot. You don't want to do it. Stacey made you do it, and then you did it, and then he insulted you for doing it.
We're sorry about that. He didn't really say
buddy.
that. That was our guy Nicky Knuckles.
That's
with
okay.
that- with that comment.
Jason called me a lumberjack on Sox broadcast because I was at a Sox game enjoying it was a nice weather day,
Right.
so I went to the Sox game. But I had a jacket on because if you go to Guaranteed Rate Field and you're in the shade,
shade,
it's cold.
yeah, it
Like
makes a
it's
big
10,
difference.
15 degrees colder, and I'm sure at any ballpark, but just you notice it at Guaranteed Rate because of how it could be the fifth inning of a game. You could be 90 degrees if you're sitting on the third base side, but if you're on the first base side, it's going to feel like it's 60.
Yeah.
So I brought a flannel like jacket, and they showed me on camera, which is nice of the crew. And Jason, I found out, was basically saying if you need a tree cut down,
Call
here's
Adam.
your man. The lumberjack has come to the game. So I think that's my return to our buddies Jason and Steve.
Talking about the jingle sticking in your head. Also, you remember the Thompson twins whispers?
I listened to them a lot.
Hold me now.
Oh,
So
look
the
at
A
us.
strong 1970s.
See, you could have done the jingle. Listen to
The
that.
first Thompson twin is off the board. Men Thompson, who was considered more of the driver slasher type who can really get to the rim. These kids are 6'7". As I mentioned, they played a couple of years for the overtime elite, G League Ignite, And, honestly, I haven't seen a lot of them play, but the clips I've seen, Men especially, looks like he's a good prospect. He can really attack the basket.
You said you like John Morant, and that's one of the comparisons that you hear about Amen Thompson, because his brother is more of like a stretch wing, maybe like a 6'7", 6'8" type of
Yeah, a
wing
little
player,
more
who
of a
can
spot-up
shoot,
shooter,
more of
yeah.
a shooter. But Amen Thompson is the basket attacker. He's kind of a playmaker. He moves well without the basketball. Supposedly, he's the better defender. He's really good Osar is the more impressive defender, but Ahmed is apparently the better ball handler of that group. So
He's a
more of
dynamic
he's
guy.
a dynamic point guard type player. So, this is a big pick for Houston to get. I am curious. Houston's got a lot of they're guard heavy.
Yeah, it's kind of an odd choice. And then the rumors that James Harden might consider going back. I mean, in terms of roster construction, that's one of the things that happens to a lot of lottery teams. They load up on guys, there's a lot of duplication. All of a sudden, for the coach, how do you deal with minutes?
Oklahoma City's you had a game earlier this year where you saw the Thunder, and you guys were talking. I remember watching from the road, watching the broadcast, and you guys were talking. You're showing the Thunder's picks over the course of the next, I think it's like 7 or 8 drafts going to like 2027, 2028. And what are they going to do with it? Like, they still haven't started to make too many moves. Now, I like their roster. I like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I like Josh Giddey a lot. I'm a big fan of him. We still don't know what Chet Holmgren's going to look like as a player because he didn't get a chance to play. He got hurt before the season began last year. What are you getting from them? I'm just curious. It's not a criticism of the Thunder, and it's an interesting plan.
At some point, you have to package those picks, or maybe with a young player and a couple of picks, and then try to get into the top 3 of the draft, or maybe acquire a veteran. And Oklahoma City just shocked everybody. I mean, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander made a huge jump, to be an All-NBA
Most improved player, yep.
But they're at the point that Chet Holmgren is going to play this year. At some point, you've got to add some veterans to that mix to see if you can really become a force.
Legitimate veterans too. You can't just say, "Well, we're going to go get like an Al Horford type." Not to say that Al Horford's not a legitimate player, but you need a ball dominant player that at some point can give you 20 points that's a veteran. Like, there's guys out there that are going to be looking for spots come trade deadline. If the Thunder are in it, if they're the 7 seed, the 6 seed, I think it's that you have to strike while you have Shai Gilgeous at a good spot. You have Josh Giddey under a relatively easy contract. You have to do that stuff.
The Detroit Pistons are at number 5, and they had to be devastated. They tied for the worst record in the league, and they fall to 5 in the lottery. They have that exciting backcourt with Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey. But did the other Thompson twins just go?
They just went. Both of them went. So this is Detroit's pick now.
I don't think they've announced it. I think they're just showing the replay of
okay.
Ben
But the Pistons pick is in.
Yeah.
I'm just waiting to see who they got.
But, that's a team that is really potentially interesting.
Dangerous.
They got that Jalen Duren. They picked up Wiseman in a trade with the Warriors.
They still have Bogdanovich
Marvin
as well.
Bagley.
Yeah, Marvin Bagley.
It's a really interesting squad. Had they won the lottery and gotten Wembanyama, that could have been a team that would potentially really been a force in the East very quickly.
I agree with that. And I think this is what, Stacey and I talked a lot about this over the course of the latter half of the season, especially because teams like Cleveland aren't going away. Now, did Cleveland turn out to be what you wanted them to be? Not necessarily. It may not have gotten to the point where you wanted them to win a playoff series to really feel like the investment they made in a Donovan Mitchell and what they've done in the draft and still having these bigger players is valuable. By the way, it is Thompson.
Yeah.
The second Thompson twin went to Detroit. So now they're getting a really good defender, which they needed. That's actually a nice pickup for them. But again, another team that's a little guard heavy right now. So they might have to play a little bit smaller compared to some of the other teams that are picking up guards for need.
Right.
They're gonna have to play. They're forced to play a little bit smaller unless they start to make some moves.
Yeah, I mean, you get to the point in the draft now where a lot of these guys are going to be developmental type players. I don't think there's anybody that walks in now is going to be a franchise type talent, and that's one of the weaknesses of the draft is that so many kids come out at 19 years old after 1 year of college or playing for the G League Ignite or Overtime Elite, and they're just not prepared for either the physicality or the demands of playing 82 NBA regular season games.
That was the thing about Wembanyama too, because he played 70 games. Like he played in a French professional league that has like a full-on schedule. So jumping to 82 games doesn't seem like that wild of a concept for a player like Wembanyama. But yeah, like as you were saying, it takes a lot to all of a sudden try to jump from a 35, 40 game schedule, whatever it is that you play, even if you're playing at against other potential pros, it's still a lot to ask. And I think a lot of guys have trouble with that just in the second half of the year. You see that with rookies all the time in the second half of the season.
Let's talk more about the Bulls. Obviously, everyone here is hoping that they're going to do something to get into this draft. And the problem is, without, they owe the Spurs a 25 first-round pick from the DeMar DeRozan sign and trade deal, and they just don't have a lot of draft capital that they can try to move to try to get into this first round. What would you like to see the Bulls, assuming they don't make a major rebuild, how can they tinker around the edges to make this more than a team that just the ceiling is as a play-in squad?
It's really hard because they are hamstrung by the Lonzo Ball contract for the moment. Again, it's just a tough situation. You can't predict injury like that, but it's an unfortunate circumstance to be in. You still have Zach LaVine's contract. You have one more year of DeMar DeRozan, and the word seemingly over the last couple of weeks has been Vucevic would like to stay, even if it's a somewhat of a discount. He said he would take a discount in a sense to keep playing for the Bulls. It's still a $20 to $25 million commitment you're looking at, maybe $20 to $22 million a year commitment that you're probably looking at for a player like Vooch, who still in this market commands that. His shooting was not nearly as good 2 seasons ago. This past year, it kind of leveled back up to a more career-like spot. He was one of the top rebounders in the NBA, played every game. That's a big deal, obviously, especially when you're a team looking for health and consistency in personnel. So you still have a lot of money on the books. Now the salary cap was raised about $3 million compared to this past year. That'll give you a little bit of leeway. Derrick Jones Jr. did not re-sign, so that's $3.5 million that's back on your books right now. So you can find some players that will make you better on the margins, and you're still in a position where you can get Kobe White at somewhat of a discount on his next deal. You can get Ayo Dosunmu on somewhat of a discount if you're fortunate enough to keep adding your depth. Williams is still under his rookie contract, so it's not like you don't have a ton of opportunity to try to grab a player or two, but you're only going to be able to get a significant piece, maybe 2 at most on the edges. So they both have to hit. You can't go out and sign a Goran Dragic and have him be off the roster by February. You can't sign another Andre Drummond type and not play him. Again, I understand if the personnel is not working, that's fine. Don't sign a player like that. That's not going to contribute in a full season in a significant role at that cheaper price. You can do that. There are players out there that are available, but you have to scout them well and you have to pick the right ones. And you have to hope they hit. Unless you're going to blow it up, or unless you're going to make a move for a Levine or a DeRozan type of contract right out of the gate, you just don't have the room to do it right now.
Now, the Vucevic situation is very interesting because he's an unrestricted free agent, but the only teams that really have cap space are most of the rebuilding teams. You know, guys that really, or teams that really would not have a need for a veteran like Nikola Vucevic. You're kind of walking a fine line there. You don't want to insult a veteran player who's performed well for you, but do you see a scenario where there's not a market for Vuce, and maybe the Bulls can get him at a really discounted price?
I mean, that'd be a lot to ask. I do feel like that's a fair point, though. And again, he's already willing to take a little bit less money. But you know, you're hoping for an extra $2 million back on the books, right? That you don't have to pay Vucevic. Would he be willing to give back $6 million over a 3-year deal? Because that does help you go get somebody for the next 2 seasons. That a Derrick Jones Jr. type in terms of price range, and you're hoping that maybe they're a little bit younger or they're going to be a little bit more consistent in terms of contribution. So, like the roster from 1 to 8 or 1 to 6 is fine. You know, Caruso, you can really go 1 to 7, assuming you get Kobe White and Ayo Dosunmu back. Maybe now you say 1 to 8. You're feeling okay about. But after that, you still need to fill out 9 and 10 because you're going to have nights where, you know, some of those guys in the 1 through 8 aren't going to play. You can't play an 8-man rotation for 82 games. So, you know, you have to hit on your signees. And if you do get the luxury of maybe getting a player like a Vucevic that says, I'll take a little bit less money, you can go sign one other player, then yes, that's certainly helpful. The only way that happens is what you said, Mark, is if there's no market for him whatsoever.
The Orlando Magic are one of several teams that have multiple picks in the first round. They just made their first selection at number 6. They took the combo guard Anthony Black out of Arkansas, so we'll see how he figures into that mix. Another team with a surplus of guards. You know, there's been some talk that maybe Jalen Suggs is available. He was a fantastic college player at Gonzaga. Would that be a player that maybe you'd be interested in seeing if the Bulls could somehow acquire him?
I would. You know, obviously he's had some big games against the Bulls. He had a big shot against them in November to win a game at the United Center. He is a tough player that I think would get a lot of value from some tutelage of a player like a DeMar DeRozan. Like Cole Anthony is the kind of the veteran on the Orlando Magic, right? And he's in he's going into like his 6th or 7th year or something like that now. That's not, you know, you would love to have a player like that get a little bit more from a DeMar DeRozan type. In fact, we saw that, I think, it was 2 seasons ago when Orlando had a win against the Bulls in Orlando. This is right after Alex Caruso got hurt after the Grayson Allen incident. And this is a game where the Magic played really well. And those young guys were barking a lot, and they were doing a lot of talking. And you saw DeMar DeRozan at one point go over to Jalen Suggs and be like, hey, you played a great game. Kind of, I'm obviously paraphrasing. I don't know exactly what was said, but it came off as like, you played a great game. You know, be proud of yourself. But, hey, you gotta kind of rein this in. You know, you're meant to have a long career in the NBA. You're not trying to, you know, flame out in the first 3 years and try to make this your personality as an NBA player.
And Stacey loves Suggs.
And we're both huge fans. He's an incredible athlete in high school. He's Mr. Football, Mr. Basketball. That's incredible talent. He played great at Gonzaga, made big shots at Gonzaga, was a floor general there. I saw him during his freshman year, and Mark Few could not have more positive things to say about him on and off the court. And he's the type of player that would, I think, benefit from guys like Vucevic and DeRozan. And if you could somehow swing a deal for a team that is so guard-heavy right now. And Anthony Black is kind of the same type of player in terms of, like, you know, the floor general type player. That's what Jalen Suggs is. But now he's coming off the bench. You know, maybe he wants to kind of get an opportunity to be a starter again. I think, let's say the Bulls don't re-sign both White and Dosunmu. And all of a sudden, you know, maybe you can swing to try to get a player like that back. I don't know if Orlando would make the trade to the Bulls specifically, but I feel like that's a type of player that you do want. That's what we were talking about with Russell Westbrook last year. That's what Pat Beverly was. You know, kind of a floor general leader type. Even if he's not going to be your highest scorer or your biggest assist guy, it's something that the Bulls could use.
Yeah, and Orlando owes the Bulls after all they got from the Vucevic trade.
These last couple of years,
They should try to help us out a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned Stacey being high on Suggs. He also really likes Kobe White. We've all seen the videos and the photos of Kobe White working really hard this summer on his ball handling, which he did last year as well. And, is it time to commit to Kobe White as your starting point guard? I know Billy had always been reluctant to do that, but he saw signs of growth this year in terms of making decisions on the court, being better on the defensive end, where I think that they might be willing to do that. I mean, Patrick Beverley, by all indications, is going to price himself out of the Bulls' range.
Probably, yeah.
So he's unlikely to come back. Would you be okay with Kobe White being the starting point guard on day one?
It's probably not like the first preference, and that's strictly based off of just past results. So not the first preference, but that doesn't – I can't speak to his future. And what we have seen is what you guys talked about, what Stacey was harping on all year, and he was right from the start. Indiana just got their pick in. It's another
Surprise
player from France.
there, yeah. That's
Bilal
the
Coulibaly.
teammate of Wembanyama.
Yep. Same team from the Metropolitans in France.
And athletic forward, 6'7", 6'8", and the Pacers were looking to add. They've got an interesting roster as well. Benedict Mathurin was a very good rookie for them last year. And, of course, Tyrese Halliburton is an all-star last year. They've got they committed to Miles Turner in the middle. So it's a team that has some potential. This is a bit of a reach pick, but we'll see if it pays off for them.
It feels like once you get past the first five, in this particular draft, now it's not. I don't necessarily say they're all reaches, but now you're starting to get into very specific skill sets. But like you were talking about, like what you said and what Stacey talked about from the start of the year, he's right about growth. The growth was there, and I think our perception of young players in the NBA has been shifted so much in the last 20 years, right? Because if you get picked in the top 5 especially, or whatever it may be, right away you're expected to contribute, right? And if you're not, then you're a bust. Like, that seems to be the mentality now. And Stacey kept saying the phrase a lot this season, you got to let players develop. Kobe White was a great example of it, and to try to temper some of the expectations and criticisms of Patrick Williams, who was in his 3rd year, but has really only played 2 full seasons in the NBA because of the wrist injury that he suffered in his 2nd season. So, like, you're trying to temper some of that stuff, and you're trying to evaluate more based on what you've seen and what growth you've seen. And if it's a last resort, let's call it for the time being, if the last resort was Kobe White becomes your point guard, that's not a bad last resort. Is it my preference? No, because I really think he's still developing as a shooting guard. I think he's really valuable as a shooting guard. Defense has been much, much better, so that doesn't – I'm not worried about him on the defensive end. I think he's gotten better at a good pace. It's the offensive end that I'm concerned about in terms of consistency, and I'd rather have him stay in one slot, one job, to try to be as consistent as possible rather than jump him into another spot as the point guard. We have a trade now, too, of that number 7 pick. Bilal Coulibaly got picked by the Pacers, and he just got traded to the Wizards.
Yeah, there had been some talk that San Antonio was trying to get a 2nd pick to put the 2 French teammates together, but obviously that didn't work out. But the Wizards are going to be a team that's very active, and since they're going on the long slog rebuild, here's a young guy that maybe can pay off into being a really good player down the road. So we're seeing some movement. Hopefully we'll see the Bulls get involved at some point during this first round today. You look ahead, free agency comes right on the heels of the draft, and the Bulls will have the mid-level exception, which has been upgraded to about $12.4 million, and the biannual exception, which is at $4.5 million. There's some talk that maybe the Bulls won't use the full value of that because they don't want to get into the luxury tax. But we can't do business for them. But there are shooters available that the Bulls could certainly use. A guy like Max Strus, who's a free agent who the Bulls had at one point, local guy who went to Miami and really has made a name for himself. Gabe Vincent, who played so well for them in the playoffs, is also a free agent, a guy who's a bit of a combo guard but could run the point for you. Where do you think their priorities are going to be, Adam, in terms of free agency? Shooting?
I think it's shooting at the top of the list because, and obviously there's a lot of holes that need to be filled. It feels like, based on the personnel, based on Lonzo Ball, not playing more than likely for most of the year, if not the entirety of the season, and not knowing if you're going to have Kobe White or Ayo Dosunmu. You don't know necessarily the personnel that you have. So one of the easiest things to at least look at was you have to improve three-point shooting. I'm not saying you have to be the Houston Rockets and take 40 a game. You don't have to do that, but you can't take 30. you have to be able to generate opportunities to get an extra point because the Bulls lost a lot of close games this year. And they blew games where they had leads that come down to the wire. And games are one of the margins by basically the league average. The league average is 36%, taking about 35 threes a game. And you have to at least be closer to that. And the Bulls were not close enough to those things this season. So there's, Will Barton is out there. Karis LeVert is out there as a potential shooter, as a backup guard.
Seth Curry.
Seth Curry is one of the great, in terms of percentages, one of the best three-point shooters ever. He's not as prolific as his brother Steph, but he's incredibly efficient.
George Niang.
I don't think you go like to Oladipo. There's the shooting guard list is getting a little bit shorter. Nickeil Alexander-Walker doesn't really do it for me. Terrence Davis doesn't really do it for me, even though I think Davis was a decent defender when he was in Sacramento. So there are a couple names out there, but a veteran shooter is probably something you need to have. Somebody who's going to play some defense for you and give you at least 20 minutes a night and be able to shoot 38, 39% from three-point range. The Bulls desperately need that. Patrick Williams was one of their best three-point shooters, and he kind of tailed off at the end. Kobe's a hot, streaky shooter, but he wasn't consistent enough. And Zach LaVine, it can't just be threes with Zach. You want him to go to the line, you want him to go to the rack, and you want him to attack as much as he can too. So,
yeah, we mentioned some of the trades that were made in the last couple of days. How about the Celtics getting Kristaps Porzingis for? They did give up Marcus Smart, former Defensive Player of the Year, but they also got 2 picks in the trade. Yeah. They got the best player in the deal and 2 first-round draft picks. Sometimes that's a case of the rich getting richer.
It feels like it, but they're also looking for the final piece, right, to win. And their final piece could be some consistency at a big spot. Because Robert Williams, I think, is a really good young player, but he's not going to give you a whole lot offensively. He's a rebounder and a great shot blocker and a good defender. You can leave him at the 5 and now make Porzingis a really tough matchup at the 4. Al Horford's a really strong veteran player who's been good just about every year, and he's always going to end up hitting some big shots for you in the playoffs, and he's always going to make a big play for you late in the game. He just happens to be able to do that for a long period of time. But I think the roster makeup of that group, if they have a point guard, they just need somebody to be able to get Tatum and Brown the ball at the right time. Like what we talked about earlier rings true for a lot of teams is, do you trust the point guard to get the ball to the right spot late in a close game? And if you get that, then you're probably okay. And I think Boston needs that, and I think they'd be fine. They'd be another, I don't know if it's necessarily the favorite, but they'd be one of the 2 or 3 favorites in the Eastern Conference again.
The latest pick, Jarace Walker, the selection made by Washington, but I assume that's going to Indiana.
That's going to
in
Indiana.
Trade.
Yep,
so he's a forward out of University of Houston, very athletic guy, kind of a combo forward, kind of a Patrick Williams type, but a little more powerful, I think, than Patrick. It'd be interesting to see where he fits, but Indiana was in the market for a guy who could play the 4 position, and I think Walker fits there. A very explosive guy that can attack the rim.
That was a position that they were weak at because Turner's a strong center. We mentioned it. They're guard heavy. With Halliburton's locked down the point guard position. They have a really good backup point guard, or at least had one, T.J. McConnell. You mentioned Matherin. They've got young talent on that roster, but the 4 spot is probably where they were lacking. They're okay on wings and guards and at the 5.
So what do you think about Memphis? Obviously, the news came last Friday. John Morant, a 25-game suspension. They trade Tyus Jones in that multiple-team deal, but they get Marcus Smart back, who will, hold down the fort until Morant comes back, and then they'll have a combination lineups with the 2 of them together. They're going to say goodbye to Dillon Brooks. It's kind of a weird mix there. They'll get Steven Adams back from injury. They look like a team that was poised to maybe contend in the Western Conference, and they took a huge step back last year. Morant was hurt a lot, which obviously impacted them. But Jaren Jackson, the Defensive Player of the Year, the former Michigan State star, is Memphis still in the discussion in the West, or have they fallen off?
No, I think they're still in the discussion because they'll get Morant back. Smart is a good pickup for them I don't even want to call him a stopgap because I think he'll be a contributor all season no matter what. He'll just be in that point guard role. They're fine without John Morant. They've played a lot of games the last 2 years without John Morant. What killed them was Adams being hurt. When Steven Adams got hurt, that's when things really went downhill for them. Now, what are they going to feel like? How are they going to feel about Morant next year? Has that disrupted the chemistry of that group? That's a real question. That's a legitimate question. That was a problem supposedly in the locker room where Steven Adams was trying really hard to kind of play the leadership role. And he is a veteran on that roster, and he is a dominant presence both on and off the court, I would say.
Right.
So that's somebody that I would listen to, and certainly not somebody that I would want to run into in a back alley if I had upset him at any point. But I feel like that's when they really struggled, when they lost a little bit of the leadership of Morant, and when he's off the deep end doing whatever it is that he's doing, and nobody's paying attention to Steven Adams. I think there's a lot of strife in that locker room that's going to need to be solved. Maybe Marcus Smart is a good salve to try to get them into a good place, but talent-wise, they're still there. They still have shooting. They improved it at the trade deadline when they got Luke Kennard. Losing Tyus Jones is tough because he did such a good job when Morant was out, but that's why you get Marcus Smart. I still feel like talent-wise, they're one of the best teams, and they got better defensively. Now you have 2 defensive players of the year, the last 2, on your roster, both at the point and at the rim. Arguably best shot blocker in the league, Jaren Jackson. So I still think talent-wise, they're one of the best teams in the Western Conference.
We do the show live on YouTube every week. You can join us on the live chat as well. We've got a celebrity on the chat right now. Guy by the name of Stacey King.
Oh, buddy.
You said Code Blue, Whispers is down. Is Whispers still alive?
Hey, I'm with the
what do you got to say back
I'm with
to
the
him?
best in the business here. We're doing the NBA draft. I'm going to start stepping on your guys' toes. Are you kidding me?
Maddie, we're going to have to give Stacey a call. Try to get him on the line.
Matt, Tim, you're allowed to talk.
Yeah.
That's
So
why
that's the job for the
why
Sriracha
they
crew.
call me
We got to get
Whispers.
Stacey on here to say hello.
No.
No,
Well,
he is on the chat though. So
well,
giving
speaking
us
of
the
one of the
zingers
things
every
he
now and
was
again.
talking about with the whole Memphis thing, he thought that the Bulls should grab Dylan Brooks.
He was a fan. I mean, he's a fan of how Dylan Brooks plays. And Dylan Brooks is another really streaky three-point shooter, but he gets really hot, and he can carry you for a couple quarters in a game from the three-point line, but it only happens once, every couple of weeks. Defensively, he's really, really good until you get him into matchups that don't favor him. That was the big problem with Brooks, because most matchups he plays very well, and he's got the foot speed to keep up with most guys. He struggles with ultra-athletic players. He struggles with guys that have a little bit of physicality or size to him that work in the post. He's not a great post defender. I think he's a better perimeter defender than he is a post defender. Now, I shouldn't say he's a bad post defender. I think he's better on the perimeter than he is in the post. And, is that good enough for you when 3 out of every 4 nights he's going to have an okay defensive night and 1 out of every 4 he's going to have an okay shooting night? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's worthy of taking a flyer on based on all the kind of attitude and what he was talking, the way he was talking, and that turned a lot of players off around the league. I had a couple conversations with some players that I'm friendly with, and kind of said the same thing. Like, you haven't done anything, and I'm sure part of that is just Memphis Grizzly fatigue. So wherever he goes, he's going to kind of carry that baggage with him. But in terms of quality of player, like, there are nights where he's the best player on the floor for 2 quarters. And that's happened a couple times. The Bulls have seen the good of him and the bad of him when they played the Grizzlies too. So it's an interesting proposition. I don't know if I'm fully sold on it, but I think I think there's a case to be made.
He might be due for a reset.
Maybe a change of scenery does him well. I know that's kind of a cliched term we use sometimes, but sometimes that's all you need. You don't like, how many of us have been in a job where we're just like, nah, I don't like my boss. I don't like the coworker. I don't like the structure of the organization that I work for. And then you go to another place, go, yeah, I like this job better. Even, the pay's the same, but I like the the boss, or I like these coworkers, or I like the health plan, or whatever it is. Like, you find reasons to be happy in certain places, and you find reasons to be upset. And he seems like he's not happy in Memphis, probably because of his own doing. Maybe anywhere he goes, it's enough. Just a change of scenery is enough to make you feel a little bit more comfortable. And hopefully, right out of the gate, you want to make a good impression. You want to have, you want to have good performances. So your new team, your new job, your new coworkers like you and appreciate you and respect you.
Yeah, he would get that in Chicago because everyone loves coming here.
Everyone loves it. You've talked. Timmy's a walking example of it.
Right.
Tim is a boss. He's the one who's usually on the other end of people sniping at him, right?
Oh,
And that's
buddy.
why I'm looking
Is
for a
this
new
why?
job
Is this
every day.
is this why Timmy is quiet? Because he doesn't know what to do without Stacey busting on him every 4 minutes. Is that what
I
it is?
think that's
Yeah.
part of it.
Okay.
Come on, throw some shots at me, Adam.
I'm not good at it, man. I leave
At least a throat punch.
I
Come on.
leave it to my guy to be the soft-hearted, chops buster, and I just come in for the residuals. That's fine.
Not
That's
even
all.
the threat of a throat punch.
I'm not great at it. I have no power behind any type of punch I'm going to give.
Well, one of the questions on the chat is, give me a reason to be optimistic about the Bulls for this season. And I'm sure the audience here at McGonagall's is feeling the same thing. Give us a reason to be optimistic. 40-42. They did finish 14-9 down the stretch after they added Patrick Beverley. With good health, is this a team that can make that move into the top 6 in the East?
I think it's going to take some roster help. I still think you need roster help. I don't think this was a complete team really at any point last year because you didn't have, Ayo played so well as a rookie, and he started out okay, but he hit a little bit of a wall as a point guard. He started to get a little bit exposed at times defensively. He's still a really quality player. And again, another offseason, and again, this is off the assumption that he comes back. I'll assume Ayo and Kobe are coming back strictly because they're restricted free agents, not unrestricted. So let's just operate in that sense right now. The roster's good. It's still several steps away from being a championship roster, and it's still a step or two away from being a top 6 team. I think that's where they're at right now. There's a lot of time. It's not opening night yet. Even if nothing happens tonight, I would love. The front office is going to speak today,
right?
Which was a little bit of a surprise to me, knowing that they're close to the vest nature of how this front office has been, and that's fine. I've said this before. I don't care that the front office doesn't go out and say something every week. I don't need them to, but it is nice once in a while to feel like that there's some kind of plan in place. It's hard to put a plan in place on draft night itself because you're still trying to evaluate what the rest of the league has. After all, any other trades are made, you're still trying to evaluate. I would like to know that, all right, we have a lot of time before opening night. It's still 4 months away at this point, a little less than 4 months away. You still have time to make something happen for your roster. And I think a couple of steps are enough in the Eastern Conference in the middle of the pack to be able to get into the top 6. Miami was fighting for a top 6 spot. They fell into the play-in tournament, but they were still fighting for a top 6 spot for a good portion of time. Same deal with a team like Atlanta. They were still fighting to be into the top 6. They ended up in the play-in. Not a lot separated 6 through 11, it felt like, over the course of the last
you got New York and Cleveland that are strong teams in the middle.
That's 4 or 5, New York and Cleveland, but do you have full faith that they're going to do exactly what they did this past year? Is New York going to look the same way they did this past season? Are they going to end up making some moves?
They have the potential to make some moves because they have a number of additional draft picks that they picked up from Dallas in the Porzingis trade. They've got picks coming from Washington as well. So, they could make a major trade. That's why there were a lot of rumors of potentially about them being interested in Zach LaVine because they have the combination of young players and picks that could maybe put together an attractive package enough to entice the Bulls to make that type of trade.
That was one of the there was a when you're in the position that the Bulls are in and you're a fan of a team that's in a similar position where you don't really have a lot of room to make a ton of moves or even in a position like the Bulls are in where you don't have a draft pick or you don't have a lot of capital to be able to make a move, you start looking at potential scenarios and draft partners. I saw a proposal that was intriguing in terms of Warriors, Knicks, Bulls, and the Bulls would end up with a player like an R.J. Barrett, a Mitchell Robinson, 4 first-round picks, Jonathan Kuminga. All that sounds very attractive. Suddenly you get a little bit more depth in your front court. But you'd have to give up Zach LaVine, you'd have to give up DeMar DeRozan, you'd have to give up Alex Caruso.
So, in effect, you're starting over.
But it's not as if you're just trading for draft capital. You are trading for some players that have some kind of established skill set.
Yeah, Barrett was the 3rd pick in the draft.
Barrett was number 3 after Zion and Ja.
Yeah.
And Obi, let's say Obi Toppin is in the mix. That's a guy who made a lot of improvements this year and got a little bit more playing time.
Kuminga was the top 10 pick.
Kuminga was a top 10 pick that shows a lot. Hasn't scratched the surface yet. Now that's a project, but I do feel like it's one that has some upside and some decent ceiling to it. And now all of a sudden you've reset your draft capital to have first-round picks over the next 4 years, but you're giving up the chunk of your team that you could rely on for something. You could always rely on Caruso for defense. You could always rely on LaVine and DeRozan for scoring. And now all of a sudden you're taking that away, and you have to redefine a lot of roles. And you have to re-sign, but you have draft capital and you have cap room to now be able to go out and maybe sign a couple of free agents. But you are restarting. It's not a rebuild. That is a true reload. That's a restart, and you're starting hotter off the blocks than you would if you were doing what Oklahoma City, San Antonio, Houston have done in the last few years to try to reset their whole organization.
Another question from the chat. People are wondering about Lonzo Ball. We don't know if he's ever going to be able to play NBA basketball again. He just had a very difficult procedure where they actually transplanted some cartilage, I believe, which has got to be very difficult to come back from.
No one's ever supposed, Festus Ezeli, I think was the name, right, Mark, that the last player to have that procedure, and he never came back to the NBA.
So at some point, do you think the Bulls will pursue some salary cap relief from the league in order to try to get that off their books?
Yeah, there's something called a disabled player exception, I think, or something. I may be getting the acronym incorrect, but it's basically the players' union has to approve of it first and foremost, because the players' union's job is to make sure that the player is in okay shape. But it happens when a player has been out for exactly a calendar year based on injury that might be considered to be catastrophic, and obviously never playing again, or maybe not playing for a 3 or 4 year period, is probably falls into the category of catastrophic. So you can get some of that salary back. Lonzo would still make a portion of what he's owed, and he's already made 40 over the last 2 years. It's an $80 million contract, so he'd still get a portion of that he's owed. So you can take care of the player. For him to come back eventually, you'd still have to go through a lot of rigors of the process of the Players Association, the Players Union, but it's there. It's an option. It is there. And I think the next time, or maybe a couple of updates from now, whenever Lonzo Ball's health is updated, maybe now you start to look at something like that if you are, the front office. If it's not just he's not going to play this year, but he may not play for 2 years, or he may not play again, now all of a sudden you get into that discussion, and it is a possibility.
Stacey wasn't able to make it out here today, but he's on the chat, and he's running into some problems. People are asking him, Stacey, how do I get a job as executive vice president of the Bulls? I don't think you can go to Indeed and apply for that. Or LinkedIn.
Does Monster.com have an opening for that? I don't know.
Stacey's answering all the questions on the chat. He's probably bored, too, as he's watching the draft. I mean, it's the Bulls are just in a tough spot. I mean, for those of us who cover the team closely, everyone says, well, why don't they make a big trade? You don't want to trade for 50 cents on the dollar and then be even worse off than you were before you made a trade, just to have player movement.
Yeah. They've done that.
That's happened in the past. That's happened in front offices past. That's happened with teams in this city in years past. It's not a fun thing to have to sit through as a fan, and certainly not as a person who works in a front office or works for an organization. Obviously, that's difficult. I do feel like you're kind of doing a cost-benefit analysis consistently. Every time there's a move made, every time there's a trade offered, every time there's a pick on the board or something like that, you're always doing cost-benefit analysis. And, let's say you can get 80 cents on the dollar for DeMar DeRozan. Is that worth it to this front office to be able to get some player movement? Are you going to get what's valued? The Bradley Beal trade, you mentioned this earlier, Mark, does it really set the market because of how unique the situation is with Phoenix and Washington specifically? I don't know if that necessarily sets the market. I still feel like if, and it's the biggest if, I'm not personally feeling like it's about to happen. If you were to trade Zach LaVine, I still feel like you would get and be worthy of getting back a major haul. That I think 2 first-round picks is not out of the question to ask for a max player. And to have, in addition to that, I think what the rumors was an established veteran or a young, talented prospect. I don't think that's you're asking too much, especially if you're a championship or a team that has championship hopes and you're maybe a piece or two away, but you need an elite piece. Like that shouldn't be out of the realm of possibility to try to make sure you get a proper haul back for a player like a Zach LaVine he's already an established scorer. You need that if you're a championship team.
We should point out, with the new collective bargaining agreement coming into place on July 1st when the new league year begins, it's really changing the way teams have looked at roster construction. You don't want those 3 huge contracts anymore like you could basically handle in the past. And that's why the Bulls, if they wanted to make a major trade, are kind of a year too late. Remember the hauls that Utah got for both Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert?
Sure.
I mean, just the Donovan Mitchell trade. They got Lowry Markkinen, Colin Sexton, Oche Agbaji, who's going to be really good,
Sure.
and like 4 first-round draft picks.
Yep.
And then Gobert, who to me is just a guy. They got 3 players and 5 picks. I mean, so, those types of deals aren't available like they were last year because you look at, a Bradley Beal. Of course, that was a big contract. Phoenix didn't really want to take on all that money and give up a lot in return. It's just right now the money is playing such a big factor in these trades that you're not getting excellent value on these return for all-star players.
Yeah, and that's why you consider trying to get as many picks as possible because now, again, this is also it's still a draft-based league, right? Because there's only so many gravitational players in this league. I've said this for years. It's been the case for a decade. In the LeBron Curry era, there's 25 gravitational players in this league. Guys that have an elite talent for a specific thing, are really, really good overall or two-way players. There's not that many of them in the league. In a league of 400 to 500 some odd people, there's 25, 20, maybe 15 gravitational players. And could you claim that Zach LaVine is that? Yeah, you could definitely make that case that he is that player. Right now they're showing because Orlando's got the Bulls pick coming
about
up.
To pick at
Yeah,
11.
they're
I
about to
saw
pick
the
at
Bulls
11.
logo come up, and I thought maybe we had a trade. The Bulls were getting into this year's draft, but
No, they're showing the trade for
just
March of 21.
Recapping the trade. There was a bit of a pick with the number 10, Kason Wallace, the guard from Kentucky, going to the Mavericks.
Yep.
The Mavericks, of course, are in a unique situation with the whole Kyrie Irving thing. Will he return or will he not? The Magic making their pick at number 11. Hey, they're a little bit of a surprise there. Jet Howard, Juwan Howard's son, who played for him at the University of Michigan. He got off to a great start in the Big Ten, but kind of faded a little bit as the Wolverines fell completely out of tournament contention. Jet Howard going to Magic, and again, another guard going to Orlando. They have a overload at that position. Clearly, they have to do something to rebalance that roster because, you can only collect. We talked about Oklahoma City earlier. Orlando's in that same situation. So many young players competing for minutes. It's just tough to get all those guys on the court.
Yeah, I don't know how they're going to try to navigate through this unless it is starting to make some moves. And now, again, where is Orlando? I don't know, not the state, the actual location. I don't know where they
You've
are.
been to Orlando.
I've been to Orlando.
Magic Kingdom, that whole thing, Disney World.
I'm trying to figure out where they are in terms of like their organizational philosophy. Are they thinking because they've been in rebuild mode for a few years now, even before the Vucevic deal, because they were a team that made the playoffs in the bubble. I think they took a game from I can't
Milwaukee.
remember. It was Milwaukee. That's right. They won the first game against Milwaukee, and they've done that a handful of times. Vucevic won a couple of playoff games when he was in Orlando. I just don't know what their organizational philosophy is right now. Do they feel like, all right, we've tried to rebuild the last 2 years? Is it like the Oklahoma City of the Eastern Conference, where now we have assets to deliver? Do we try to cash in on it now, or are we still playing some kind of long game? Remember, Franz Wagner's great. You're going to have to pay that kid in a year, probably, if when he's a restricted free agent, or 2 years. Like, you're going to have to pay him at some point. Cole Anthony's going to be off the books. Jalen Suggs, you're going to have to pay him if you want to hold on to him, if you're not going to deal him. What are you going to do with some of these younger guys that are going to be off their rookie contracts? And are you just going to keep backfilling with, hopefully what you have is good draft picks? Are you going to keep backfilling, or are you going to make a move at some point to try to build for it?
Yeah, that's a team that definitely looks like to be in position to try to acquire a veteran player by combining some of the young guys. Remember, Jonathan Isaac came back. He was a highly regarded player, a lottery selection, missed almost 2 years because of a devastating knee injury, and he's a guy that's struggling to find minutes on the court. You mentioned Franz Wagner, former Bull, of course, Wendell Carter Jr., who went over there in the Vucevic trade and has played very well for Orlando. They unloaded Mo Bamba to the Lakers. I mean, they've made so many picks of guys that were highly touted college players. At some point, they're going to have to trade from that surplus. And people are, if the Bulls aren't able to get a draft pick today or don't make any trade, don't close the door on the possibility that they can't make a deal either before July 1st or at any point during the summer for some of these young teams that have a surplus of players at that position. And a guy like Jalen Suggs, if the Bulls are looking to upgrade at the point guard position, we talked about him earlier, that's a guy who could very well come available at some point this summer.
I don't doubt that. I bet the Bulls aren't the only team that's tracking that, though. A lot of organizations, a lot of teams, a lot of front offices are going to be looking at the exact scenario you've laid out to say, like, how about this kid? How about this guy who's shown flashes of being a talented, aggressive leader that can make big shots when you need him to?
Yeah, we could get Suggs and that bag of Doritos back that Stacey's always talking about.
Where is that? Yeah, where is that bag of Doritos, by the way?
Because that wasn't on
That
the
sounds
board.
good. The
'cause
bag of Doritos sounds great.
That was supposed to be on that list because I'm pretty sure that was part of the deal, the bag of Doritos.
This must be a delicious bag, a magical bag of Doritos. that
Stacey's still
been
fighting with
referring.
people on the YouTube chat. He's fighting them off left and right. Now he's saying, honestly, you're going to make a decision. It's either Zach or DeMar have to be traded. You know, the thing about Stacey, he's really loyal to the guys. You know, he's never going to come out and say, this guy should be traded. We were talking about Derrick Rose. We had David Kaplan on last week.
Yeah.
And Stacey, again, was on the chat because he's under the weather. And he said, ask Cap what he thinks about Derrick Rose. And he goes, well, I think it'd be great if they bring him back for a day to retire his number or whatever. And Stacey goes, no, as a player. He said, he's done. He's finished. And that's the whole thing. I you know, as a guy that I mentioned how special the Derrick Rose draft was, it would be a fantastic story if Derrick Rose could come back here, play for a season, and play at a meaningful level.
Yeah.
But, you know, if Tom Thibodeau isn't playing Derrick Rose in New York, then, you know, you wonder how much is left in the tank for D. Rose. And obviously, when he does decide to hang it up, there will be a day at the United Center. I don't know. You know, there's a debate about whether his number should be retired or not, but they will honor Derrick Rose.
Yeah,
I just don't see a scenario where he would come back and be a meaningful player for the Bulls.
I mean, he played 27 games last year. He played 25 or 26 the year before then. You know, and that's Tibbs. And now Tibbs is also notorious for tight rotations. He's very picky when it comes to who he plays, as we know in Chicago. You guys have seen it, and he's been that way in New York. There has been several stories the last few years of, well, the rotation's tightening up again, where these are the 8 men, and Evan Fournier's the odd man out, or this guy's Emmanuel Quickley's in the doghouse, so he's not going to play for a little, whatever it may be. You know, those stories have popped up in New York a bunch, and you have to be a very specific type of player to play for Tibbs. I do think Derrick Rose would take an opportunity to play if you could guarantee him that he'd be like playing 20 minutes a night or something along those lines in Chicago, and it is in his mind like towards the end. I do feel like he'd be willing to come back and play what we would consider to be meaningful basketball as a good backup and as a player that's going to be, you know, a mentor to some guards, whatever the young players may be on this roster. But you also can't guarantee that he's going to score 8 points and give you 4 assists in the 20 minutes he's going to play, because he hasn't really been able to do that consistently in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mentioned this on last week's show that one of the games, the Knicks and the Cavaliers, the Knicks blew them out one game in Madison Square Garden, and the fans were chanting for Derrick to come in. And it was kind of sad. It's almost like, you remember Brian Scalabrine when he was here, he was like the victory cigar.
But I think those are definitely different scenarios. I think the love that Derrick gets is worthy of his play. You know, it's been because of his play.
Then he came in the last 2 minutes and missed 4 shots, and it was like,
I think that's easy to be like, oh well, he's breaking now. No, he hasn't played. You know, he's been on the bench. He's been just sitting
rusty,
on the bench. He's just rusty. He's been sitting on the bench. I feel like they're. You know, Stacey said, like, there's a lot of gas in the tank for Rose. He may believe there's more than I do, but I do believe there's something left. And
Stacey just chimed in. Rose has a lot left in the tank with 3 exclamations.
He said, keep sleeping on him. It's like, again, we may differ in terms of how much we believe in Rose, but we both believe it. I still believe there's something there that you can kind of pull out of him that has some significant value to it.
Well, the Bulls are obviously going to add to this roster. I mean, they've got spots to fill. There's going to be some more movement. They've got a couple of guys on non-guaranteed contracts, and again, they're going to be trying to free up money so that they can bring in some shooting. Do you think there's a scenario where Patrick Beverley returns?
I think you're right. I think he's going to price himself out of Chicago, and there's going to be another organization out there that probably needs a player like that. Like, that's one thing. Like, Patrick Beverley, and I've seen him talk about this with young players, like young high school kids at like camps and stuff like that. And he's basically said, like, find your role in the league and be the best at your role in the league. Not everybody is Steph Curry. Not everybody is LeBron. Not everybody is Kevin Durant. As we said, there are 400 plus spots in the NBA for players to fill out. And only 20 to 25, 30 maybe are gravitational players. That's still 350 plus slots that need to be filled with people that can do the job. The rest of it is the job. Some of these guys are so talented and they're so generationally gifted that we just marvel at them and go, oh, well, that's just what everybody does. No, those guys do that for a very specific reason. They're him. They're different. You know, there's only so many guys that are different in this league. You have to be able to do the jobs on the periphery. And Patrick Beverley, the reason he keeps making the money that he does, and the reason he keeps getting signed, and people are like, oh, is he a bad teammate? He keeps getting to go in all these places. No. Guys like playing with Pat Beverley for the most part. I'm sure there are plenty of players that don't like playing with him, but that's every player. But a lot of guys seem to like playing with him, and it's because he fills a role that on your team that needs to be filled, and there are organizations out there that are going to be able to fill, that are going to bring him in to try to fill that role.
Adam Amin, kind enough to join us tonight. He's filling in for Stacey King, who's under the weather. And, you know, you've been so busy calling football on Fox, calling baseball on Fox. What do you make of what's going on around the majors? The Cubs are showing some signs of life right now. They're over in London playing the Cardinals in a 2-game series. You think the Cubs have some staying power in the National League Central?
I think they do. They're playing much better as of late, like you talked about. They've got enough of a starting rotation in terms of quality pitching right now that can carry them for a little while. I'll be curious to see what they do at the deadline. Are they going to be in it? Are they going to trade Marcus Stroman? Are they going to maybe trade Kyle Hendricks? Is Justin Steele going to be somebody that's up for grabs? Are they going to try to move some of the other guys that they've been able to pick up? I'll be curious to see how they play it, but I do feel like that division is so underwhelming. Milwaukee doesn't seem to have a whole lot of staying power. I don't know what a young team like Pittsburgh's going to be able to do. The Reds are super exciting, but young, exciting teams can fade in baseball over a 3-week period. Bad 3 weeks, and now the Reds are going to come back down to earth. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that can happen in underwhelming divisions. The Sox are dealing with it in the AL Central right now, too. I think the Cubs have staying power based on the division and based on what they have, but what's going to be the case 6 weeks from now, that's the big question to me.
You had a chance to work on the Fox broadcast with a couple of guys who played baseball in Chicago. A.J. Pierzynski on the south side, Eric Karros, who played for the Cubs. Any stories you can share with our audience about their times in Chicago and what they thought of the city?
I know Eric, who only played 1 year with the Cubs. I think it was the 2003 season when they went to the playoffs. He had a good time on Division Street. I think I can tell you that. I think that's about as far as I'm willing to go. The same way I wouldn't throw Stacey under the bus, I wouldn't throw my other partners under the bus either. But I mean, AJ's got a YouTube show now these days too, and he's doing a great job with it with Eric Kratz and Todd Frazier. Also, had a short stint in Chicago, and he's been dishing out plenty of stories about the 05 White Sox in particular. My favorite one so far is Mark Burley coming out of the bullpen drunk in a playoff and pitching in a playoff game because relievers, for the most part, they're like, well, starting pitchers for the most part are like, all right, well, I pitched my game.
Yeah, I'm
off for the next 4 days, and no, Burley had to pitch on short notice out of the bullpen and was hammered by apparently the 6th inning. It was like, all right, I guess I got to go pitch in the 8th. So I've been enjoying AJ's show where he's been able to dish out some more of this stuff.
Well, what did you think about not getting the job as manager?
He says he'll never get the job as long as Rick Hahn is in charge, because I just don't think he and Rick have a particularly great relationship. But he had a much better relationship with Kenny Williams. I don't think I'm telling any tales out of school here. I think this is fairly well known. But if that group ever shifted, I think AJ. I'm biased again. I think Stacey would make a great NBA coach. I don't think he wants the stress, and nor would I want that stress for him.
Right.
But I think he'd make a great coach. I've said that about Steve Stone as a manager, and I think A.J. Pierzynski would be a fabulous manager in Major League Baseball, but he'd only want to do it for a couple of places, and Chicago being one of them. And he just doesn't see it in the cards with the current front office, and I think any other organization that took a flyer on him would do just fine as well.
We've had some picks made while we're talking about a number of different things. Derek Lively was taken by Oklahoma City, and then I saw he might be traded to Dallas. So, we're getting to the point where you're going to be seeing a lot of wheeling and dealing because a lot of these guys are young players that may not project as guys who can help right away. And we've talked about the glut of players and young players on that Oklahoma City roster. They got the 2 Jalen Williams, who both played well for him last year. They've got a nice roster in the backcourt. They could probably use a little bit of help up front, and Lively is a shot blocker. But we'll see where he winds up after this deal is made. I think that now we're getting to the point where you're going to see a ton of movement because there are teams that have multiple selections and they can't use them all. I know Indiana's been very open about saying we can't use all those picks. They made a trade where they sent a couple of picks to the world champion Nuggets because they'll take a future pick in exchange.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of movement that's going to take place. I'm pleasantly surprised. I am a little surprised at the amount of movement, but I still expect more things to take place because based on what we've seen in the lead up to the draft, and I'm sure what we'll see in the next couple of weeks going into free agency, it seems like teams are more willing to make moves to try to hit a home run. They're like, we'll take the risk, we'll take the big swing and risk striking out for the sake of maybe having the possibility to hit a big home run and try to get the right 2 or 3 pieces in place that now formulate what we perceive to be as a championship roster.
We do a segment here every week, Adam, where we talk about some of our favorite shows, whether it's their streaming services or regular TV. It's sponsored by our friends at Biggers Mazda. Their sizzling new Elgin location at Randall Road is the biggest Mazda store in the state of Illinois. Biggers is offering a bottle of Stacey's signature hot sauce with first test drives of new or pre-owned vehicles. It's your choice, everything from the coolest SUVs to the stunning Miata. So join the fun at 2100 Randall Road in Elgin at Biggers Mazda. Tell them Stacey and Whisper sent you, and they might usher you off the property. I'm not sure.
Probably
Your buddy
true.
Jim Lecter. So
That's right.
He's been a good sponsor of the show. So go out there and take a test drive and pick up a bottle of Stacey's signature sauce. Now you're always so busy. Do you have time? Do you have any favorite TV shows or guilty pleasures that you can share with our audience?
I'm watching. I don't know if you guys watch Apple TV. I've been watching Platonic.
It's fantastic.
It's a really good show.
I was going to mention that one today.
Really a big fan of it. I love Seth Rogen. Rose Byrne and Seth Rogen were in the Neighbors movies together.
Yeah.
They're really, really good together.
The writing is so good in there.
It's the same group that did Neighbors. I think it's a husband and wife that produce and write the show. It's really, really well done. I'm a big fan of that. I'm going to start The Bear season 2.
Yeah, it's
it
just
just
available
came out.
now
It just came
on
out.
Hulu.
Obviously, I'm a big fan of the show. It took me a while to get to it because I have flashbacks because my parents owned an Italian beef restaurant.
Is that right?
When I was in
Wow.
a teenager in Lombard, Illinois, they owned it. It was called Mr. Beef.
Yeah.
Just like on the Bear, it was
Yeah.
the store is called Mr. Beef. It's in River North. But the store that we owned in the suburbs was called Mr. Beef, and I worked there from 5 a.m. to noon most days during the summer, and it was right next to the DMV where I got my license, and I had to go pick up bread and make hot dogs, make pizza puffs, and make Italian beef sandwiches, and I have a lot of weird kind of flashbacks to that now that I'm watching The Bear.
As I got distracted because Grady Dick.
You almost
star,
suffered a seizure from the lights on that suit.
He says I'm from Kansas, so he's wearing the Dorothy red
suit, the Dorothy
glimmering
slipper
jacket.
suit.
So where's he going?
He's going to
the
Toronto,
Raptors.
and so I guess it's appropriate. He's wearing Raptors colors essentially right now. So
It's a
there's
nice
no
pickup for
place.
them.
There's no place like Canada. I'll be fascinated to see if they can hold on to Fred VanVleet, if they can re-sign him,
Yeah.
because that's going to be one of the bigger moves in the NBA as well. Even if he doesn't leave Toronto, that's still one of the bigger moves already in the NBA, depending on where Fred VanVleet ends up. Again, a player that I would love to see the Bulls take a swing at, but it's
a big price tag
huge.
there,
It's
yeah.
too much of a contract to be able to take on. This is Grady Dick earlier today, which I love. I love that our crew showed this to us. We're seeing the video of his outfit.
Shoes.
He's proud of it. He's even got his own logo now, the GD chain. So you got to be careful with those letters. But
And not just the jacket, but the red bottom shoes as well. That's impressive. I respect the confidence.
Yeah.
If nothing else.
Well, let's go back. Talk about the Bear. The star character in there, of course, played Lip in Shameless, and he won some awards for that part.
Yep.
I mean, if you watch the first 2 episodes of season 1, that is an intense show.
It is. It is.
And more humor came in as the season went along. I'll be curious to see what they do with him opening his own restaurant.
I really like where they've gone with it so far. There's a couple shows out there that have hit me, and I think The Bear was one of them. There's a show called Shoresy that's also on Hulu that I'm a big fan of. It's only 6 episodes. It's a really easy watch. It's about Canadian hockey players. It's a really funny show that I'm a big fan of. Platonic was great. I'm like a lot of people who just finished watching Ted Lasso, right?
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of Ted Lasso, and I really enjoyed how they finished up that storyline. So.
Stacey always gives us some crazy shows.
Well, listen. I know he and Brady are always texting about it in our group chat. Like they've turned me on to Snowfall a little bit. I haven't watched a ton of it. I've watched like 2 episodes of it, but they're really enjoyable. They're all watching Bel Air together when they made the remake, like the kind of dark remake of the Fresh Prince, which was really interesting. So, yeah, we've got our group chat is it's interesting. I'll leave it at that because we just have like it's just an ongoing conversation with the 3 of us. So
well, speaking of dark, Stacey was telling us about this Winnie the Pooh thing where they're actually murdering characters where they're out to destroy everybody.
Yeah, don't run into Eeyore. He's got an axe.
He's got an axe to grind. There's no
Good
question
Lord.
about that. So, hey, here, I'll set Tim up for this one. You know what I've been watching? Fubar with Arnold.
Oh, with
Arnold
Arnold,
on
yeah.
Netflix.
The
So the premise of that
documentary is great,
He
too.
and his daughter are both in the CIA, and unbeknownst to either one of them, and then they have to team up on a mission. It's very corny. But just Arnold, trying to play the character. There's some humor in it, and it's kind of a fun show. It's an 8-episode thing, not a big commitment time-wise.
Hey, did you see the documentary too?
I haven't started
I think it's
that
a
yet.
4-part. I've
Yeah.
gone through the first 3.
What'd you think of that?
It's excellent. That guy he's a piece of work. I mean, they go through the stages: the bodybuilding, the acting, and
It's
just
three
finished
whole,
the-
it's three
the Governator.
separate lifetimes that the guy's basically lived after coming over to the United States. Kind of incredible.
Somebody's trying to sell me on watching the 4-part Bill Walton thing, the 30 for
Sure.
30s. Have you seen it? Any of that?
I
haven't
watched
seen any
that.
of it, no.
Excellent.
I was told it's really good, but you see Bill on the college broadcast now, and he's so over the top. I always felt bad for Jason having to work with him. I mean, you can't. It's tough to stay on the game because he's like spraying to all fields at all times.
Jason's a unique character though because he can handle it really well. Like he handles it so well with interesting. Like Dave Pash has worked with Bill Walton forever, and Dave's a good friend of mine. And he's talked about you have to be a special. It takes a special mindset to go in and do a broadcast with Bill Walton. They talk about his broadcasting career in the documentary. I heard an interview with the director of it. Really good director. It's the same guy I think who contributed to who did Hoop Dreams. So it's the same director. So this is a guy who knows the basketball world and did a really good job with it. So Bill's a wonderful person. Like I feel terrible for him. Like he was just never meant to play basketball. He had the
His
narrow
body just broke down,
he had narrow feet, which handling the load of weight that they had to handle with him being as big as he was, it causes problems from the ground up, and I don't think I have to tell anybody who's even over the age of 30 what that's like because I'm in the same boat where it's like ground up you have to be in a decent enough shape and Bill to his credit has done a lot of great things in his career and he's a good man and he's always been a good guy to hang around with.
Well, I'm old enough to remember his performance against Memphis State at that point, where I think he made something like 22 of 24 shots from the field. Just
incredible
destroyed.
college player.
Yeah, they show that in the documentary. It's-
Incredible college player.
And then they do a tour of his house, and that is something to see.
I gotta
Every
check
room is
that
a
out.
different
I'll
band,
take a
and
look
it's
at that.
crazy.
So I'm going to get out of here in a couple minutes, and I
Yeah.
wanted to say thanks to all of you guys, and thanks to McGonagall's out here, and the
thank your
wonderful
driver, too.
the wonderful crew who's here, and I got to thank Mike. Mike was nice enough to come pick me up, and again, Stacey, to his credit, he knew he sprung it on me quick, so he's like, I'll have Mike pick you up at your place,
Windy.
which I really appreciate. So thanks to Mike, and thanks to Windy City Limo, providing championship service. You can make a reservation. It's easy. You can let Windy City break the full court pressure of traffic and get to your destination in style and on time. You can get Windy City Limousine at 847-916-9300. So again, Mike was kind enough to come by and grab me, and he'll be nice enough to take me home. So I appreciate Stacey and I appreciate Windy City Limo, and thanks to you guys for letting me jump in. I was happy to fill in for my good friend, my big brother, Stacey.
Well, you're the best jumping in at the last minute to help
thanks,
us
Adam.
out with the show. Want to thank the crowd here at McGonagall's, being good
Yeah.
sports as we watch the
We
draft
had a really
together.
good crowd too, like a large crowd that actually showed up today. So really appreciate that.
We got a couple of giveaways. We're gonna do that after we sign off with the show. Maybe do a trivia question or whatever to give away the basketball. But I want to thank everybody for coming out today. We'll have a brand new episode next week. So Ben, time to play our getaway music. Thank Thanks again for joining us on Gimme the Hot Sauce. Adam and me and our special guests. A brand new show coming up next week. We wish Stacey all the best, a quick recovery. Hopefully Stacey's back with us next week. And Stacey, you can stop fighting with the people in the chat.
What are you doing, Dragons? Did you not get the memo?